Just a Concerned Citizen by Damos on AO3. Chapter 8 Wind Down. Izuku got the call early on Friday morning, long before their usual time. To be honest, he was surprised it hadn't come sooner. Bakugo must have waited until he knew she'd be awake to tell her, because Izuku can't imagine his mom waiting when she found out. He'd always been nice to her like that. It was obvious right away that she knew something was up, because in response to his very careful, neutral, "Good morning, Mom," she took a very shaky breath and said, "Izuku, baby, are you okay?" The thing was, he was okay. Not physically. He still had very limited mobility with one of his arms, and it hurt to twist too much in either direction. But for the first time in a long, long time, he had a dream to work towards. So even though he knew that wasn't what she was asking about, it was far too easy for him to say, "Yeah, I'm fine." And then, in hopes that maybe he could avoid the conversation he knew was coming, he asked, "Are you?" If he was lucky, Bakugo had only told her that he was in the hospital, or maybe that he had done something stupid, which he'd be able to convince her that it was no big deal and that she shouldn't worry. Of course, Izuku had already used up all his luck on other things. I. Inko sniffled. "Katsuki just called me and said that he thought I could talk some sense into you, but." She took another shuddering breath, and Izuku could easily imagine the tears already falling on the other side of the phone. "Izu, he said that you ran into a gang of villains to try and save the heroes?" Izuku's heart sank so fast that it hurt. A part of him wanted to forge ignorance, say that Bakugo was being overdramatic, but he knew that wouldn't work. Bakugo may have been many things, but he wasn't a liar. He looked at his lips, that suddenly felt too dry. There wasn't much use in pretending now, was there? "I did, but I'm okay." No one ever seemed to believe him when he said that, and knew his mother wouldn't either, so he added, "The heroes are too." That didn't seem to convince her, because Izuku heard a muffled sob come through the line. He grimaced and fidgeted with the hospital blanket. As much as he hated worrying her, Izuku couldn't find it in him to regret what he had done. "Izu, why would you?" Her voice suddenly grew hard. "I thought you were over this." The line fell silent. Izuku was in shock by the outburst. Not really. He knew his mother had always worried about his heroic streak, knew that she didn't think he was capable of helping anyone either. She had always called it throwing yourself into danger, not saving someone or making sure no one else got hurt. When he had helped, he was starting to think so, anyways. Inko broke before he did. "Sorry," she sputtered. "I didn't mean." "Mom." She cut herself off with a sharp breath. All these years, and Inko had never figured out how to deal with Izuku's hero dream besides worry and hope he'll give it up for something more realistic. And then, cruelly, when Izuku had given up on it, on everything, and that had only made her worry more. There was nothing he could say that would make her be okay with this, so he didn't try. "I'm not over it. I think I never was." If he had sealed his fate by talking back to Bakugo, then saying this to his mom was a nail in the coffin. "I'm gonna be a hero. I don't think it could be anything else." Inko gasped, sniffled, and Izuku couldn't find any words to comfort her. He didn't know if they existed. There was really only one justification that could possibly help things. "It makes me the happiest I've ever been, Mom." He hoped his point wasn't weakened by the tears that were starting to be obvious in his own voice. It probably was, because Inko's sobs started up again in earnest. What else was there to say? "I'll call you back later, okay?" It was all he could think to do. His mother's response wasn't terribly coherent, and Izuku hit the end call button with a heavy heart. He supposed that Bakugo had thought she'd be able to change his mind again, but his mom had only been a single line of a long list of things that had stopped him. No, her worry had never made him stop doing anything. It had only made him good at hiding things. The thing that made him stop really was. The wind was cold so high up on the roof, stinging his cheeks, and his childhood hero, his dream, turned an awful, skeletal frown down at him and said, "You need to be more realistic." It took a shuddering breath, and wiped at his eyes. He hadn't thought about that in a long time, actively avoided it. If he was being honest with himself, it hadn't been the first time Izuku had heard that advice, but it was the first time he actually started listening to it. But even that hadn't been what had stopped him. No, that was his mom nervously telling him what had happened to Bakugo, and Izuku searching up the news clips and realizing that the villain had gotten loose because of him, that someone had gotten hurt because of him. Izuku had held that fact for him for years. That someone had gotten hurt because of him. Izuku had held that fact with him for years, and years, until he had been confronted head on with the fact that more people got hurt if no one did anything at all. Being realistic had gotten him nowhere. In the grand scheme of things, Izuku might not have been able to do much, but he was someone who was trying to help, and that was better than what he was before. He was healed enough now that he was able to hobble over the bathroom and splash water in his face until it wasn't red and blotchy anymore. A doctor was supposed to come in later that day, and he knew he'd already been making himself look like a fool when he asked about the supposed bone-mending quirk they were using on him. No need to make them think he was a crying mess on top of all that. He wandered, wirelessly, back to the bed and slumped onto it, feeling hollow. He tried very hard not to dwell on the phone call he had just had, because he knew if he did, he'd bring himself back to tears. Instead, he attempted to focus on something else, like he was probably getting discharged from the hospital today, which was nice, and he hopefully wouldn't have to go back to protective custody, which meant that he would be going to. He felt his face heat up as he remembered. Izuku didn't know what possessed Hitoshi to offer him a place to stay, but it was probably the same thing that possessed Izuku to accept. Not that he wasn't grateful for it or anything, but what? That offer, much as Hitoshi had tried to make it sound like an easy convenience for both of them, was way beyond the scope of a hero who was just trying to help. So then, did he see them as friends? Hopefully, right? It would be weird to invite someone you didn't like to be your roommate. It was just, he had to know, right? Underground heroes had to be observant. Hitoshi, especially, had to be able to guess what people were feeling. And Izuku knew that he was an obvious mess. So maybe the motivation was for them to spend more time together? Or something. Izuku really had no idea. If the plan was to make him say something, then it would never be happening. Honestly, it was probably going to be a total disaster, but he knew he'd have trouble finding a new place to live on such short notice otherwise. Best to take what he could get and try his hardest not to embarrass himself. Maybe it would be better thinking about how he was going to replace the furniture that he left behind instead of the man he'd be living with. There was a knock on the door, and Izuku blinked up at it. He didn't think it was supposed to be the doctor yet, but whoever it was would hopefully be a welcoming distraction. It was. The door slid open to reveal one Shoto Todoroki, looking as put together as one could when they only had access to a hospital shower. He held a clipboard and a bundle of papers, and he looked at Izuku with a face, otherwise blank expression, for the slight upturn of his lips. "I'm not interrupting anything, am I?" "No, just an emotional roller coaster. What do you need?" Shoto stepped further into the room, gesturing with the paper in his hand towards Izuku. "It has come to my attention that no one took a statement from you on what happened yet, considering your involvement." Izuku chuckled nervously. Yeah, that's fair. Where should I even start? Shadow settled in the plush chair that had been shoved in the corner next to his bed and gave him an absolute deadpan stare. How about when you fled protective custody? Right. Contrary to what people like to think, and as much as he had trained his quirk, Hitoshi wasn't able to brainwash someone and tell them to spill all their secrets. No, when he needed someone to talk, he had a variety of methods to make them want to tell him things. He hated doing it, doubly so when the questionee figured out what he was doing and fought against it. So far, they had found out that the woman in the interrogation room was named Hatara Natsumi, eldest child of the Hatara family, but not their heir to the company. Master degrees in chemistry with a significant work towards PhD Quirkless. Had received less injuries than Izuku in the explosion, but had lost most of her hair. She knew about his quirk, clearly, because she refused to speak if he was even in the room. When she spoke to anyone else, she kept her words short and vague. Even more annoying than her ability to stretch out an interrogation was the fact that once she had been confirmed quirkless, everyone else in the station had started spinning wild theories that ranged anywhere from "she must have not known what she was doing" to "the testimonies and reports of all the other villains and heroes on the scene were wrong, because there's no way a quirkless person could be in charge of an operation that had caused so much damage." Hitoshi chewed out the other officers when he had heard them, but knew it wasn't making much of a difference. They had been doing this routine for hours now, where some hero or officer would sit across from her in the interrogation room. Questions were asked that were avoided or ignored, and whenever she got annoyed with the person interrogating her, she stopped talking entirely. But it'd be totally wrong of him to compare her demeanor to Izuku's. She certainly didn't seem to have a care for any of the threats others had tried to intimidate her with, which was a familiar attitude. When he went back into the room, it was ostensibly to give the others who she might actually talk to a break, while still keeping the pressure up. But when he opened the door, she glared at him and hissed, "I don't have anything to say to you." Hitoshi responded, "All right, then who do you have something to say to?" And that was how they ended up here. Hitoshi, watching through the one-way glass as Izuku sat opposite to the woman who had made their life hell for the past month. Poor guy just couldn't catch a break. Though it was apparently classic Izuku fashion, he hadn't seemed to mind all that much when his first stop on being discharged from the hospital was to go talk to the villain who had put him there. "It makes sense, I think," he said when Hitoshi had admitted that she claimed not wanting to talk to anyone else. "She probably doesn't think anything she says will matter when it comes to her sentencing. I bet she's just looking for someone to rant at who she believes might actually listen." Hatara chapped her chewed down nails on the table, wrists secured tightly to it by magnetic cuffs, as she stared down Midoriya with a frankly venomous glare. Despite the fact that she had been the one who asked for him, Izuku was the one who spoke first. "I've been thinking about what you said, you know." Izuku rested his chin in one hand, staring more at the wall behind than the woman herself. "You seem pretty smart, so you have to have realized that unless you were able to coordinate with every quirkless person in Japan, all you were doing was painting bigger targets on the back of everyone who didn't have access to what you were making, right?" "Maybe in the short term," she bit back. "In the long term, I would have forced everyone to acknowledge that they can't keep ignoring us." "They don't ignore us. They punch us down," Izuku said, the grim statement so evenly, knowing the woman on the other side on the table wasn't going to argue with him. "Getting every quirkless person labeled a potential terrorist will just make them punch harder. But it would force people to acknowledge that we're at least capable of something." Hatara, who had otherwise been keeping her anger at a low simmer, finally started to raise her voice. "No one can accuse you of being worthless when they can't talk." Izuku hummed, sympathetically. The look on his face was distant, so Hitoshi really didn't have any idea what he was thinking. Hatara sneered at him. "Don't give me that. The only reason you're down here was to impress your hero friend, right? To convince him you'll be useful?" Izuku gave her a sad smile. You have it backwards, actually. They had to convince me that I could be. He licked his lips. But I know not everyone can be as lucky as me. Hatora gave a bitter laugh. You actually had a hero show up and save you? Huh, you really are lucky. Izuku glanced down at the window that Hitoshi was watching through. Yeah, it took a while. But, yeah. Both of them fell silent at that, and a worm of guilt twisted uncomfortably in Hitoshi's gut. Helping Izuku had been worth it, obviously, but it hadn't actually solved the problem, did it? Finally, Izuku looked at her and tentatively asked, I asked before, but did the people with you know? Did you have anyone actually supporting you, or... No, Hatara said bluntly, much to Hitoshi's surprise. Her expression had pulled into something much closer to exhaustion than anger. You think anyone would support a quirkless person trying to get a little revenge? No one but one of us. And not even then until I can prove it was even possible. Which I have, by the way. And if you hadn't kept meddling, I would have been able to actually do something. Hitoshi stuttered a bit. It was true. That gas had managed to incapacitate 8 pro-heroes, more or less on accident. If Hatara had more time to prepare, there was no telling how things could have gone. Worse, probably. I'm sorry, Izuku said, sounding surprisingly genuine. I mean, obviously I don't agree with what you were doing, but I don't think you should have gone through it alone either. Or perhaps, if she had even a single supporter in her life, she wouldn't have ended up here in the first place. Had Izuku had anyone at all before Hitoshi had shown up? Well, I did. Hatara's lips curled up into an angry mockery of a smile. Not so bad for a worthless nut, huh? Izuku didn't respond to that, though, to Hitoshi, the sadness that echoed in his face was an answer enough. The silence stretched on long enough that Hitoshi was starting to seriously consider calling this the end and getting Izuku out of there. Only, Hatara started drumming her fingers on the table again. You're trying to get information out of me, right? Hitoshi didn't know if Izuku nodding apologetically was the right move, but that was what he did. Hatara hissed out a sigh. I'll answer some stuff for you, if you can promise me you'll sit down with the chemistry department of Tokyo and ask them if someone who stole all their research could have pulled off something like I did. Maybe send me photos of their faces when they realize that they lost. Then she murmured, barely audible. Might as well get whatever joy I can before I die in prison. Ah, that was probably what was going to be listed as the motive, then. Though Hitoshi really hoped he'd be able to work something into the report about years of discrimination. At any rate, he was sure that he could find himself taking a great pleasure in sitting down a bunch of bigoted old academics and outlining exactly how much trouble they have caused. He hit the button for the intercom and leaned into the mic. That can be arranged. And well, she was right about the other part too. Quirkless people who got sent to prison basically never made it out. Hitoshi had no idea what he could do about that either. Hatara let out a mindless laugh. Fine then. What do you want to know? And so, the case ended as unclimatically as it began, with an email. From mine.jack@hero.net to Yoon Musafon @hero.net. Subject: Case 4088338. Subject: Case 4088838. Close request. We'll be coming by to do the paper properly tomorrow morning, but me and the analysts agreed that fringe groups were pretty much unlikely. Not impossible, but we'll basically be looking for a niche category of quirkless people with advanced biochemistry knowledge and criminal connections. Perp implied that there wasn't any helpers that weren't hired, and giving the testimony and rep sheets of everyone else we bagged, I'm inclined to believe it. Speaking of said analysis, when I swing by it'll be with him to pick up the paycheck and insurance stuff. If you don't mind giving him the promotion I talked about, I will literally walk him to another agency myself. We all know how lucky we are to have him." Izuku sat next to him as he typed up the message, blinking tiredly at the wall, eyes not focused on anything in particular. Hitoshi could relate, but before he could offer him something like coffee, Izuku realized that he had stopped typing. He tilted his head, mouth open like he wanted to ask a question. He almost looked guilty, and after a second, he turned away, clearly embarrassed. Considering, well, everything, Hitoshi didn't have a good feeling about letting that go unquestioned, so he nudged Izuku with his shoulder and asked, "You good?" "Yeah, I just..." Izuku furrowed his eyebrows as he stared at his hands. "Have you ever thought a villain might have a good point?" That was what he was worried about? Hitoshi really hadn't expected someone as smart as Izuku to struggle over the morality of agreeing with a villain, though he was also glad Izuku had asked the question of him instead of anyone else, since he wasn't sure that most of his classmates would have given a good answer. "They usually do," he answered. "Most people don't turn to crime for no reason. It's genuinely the method that we take issue with." There was absolutely another universe where Hitoshi's boundless spite had pushed him in the opposite direction, where instead of proving everyone in his life wrong and becoming a hero, he'd instead decide that if they all thought he was going to be a villain anyways, he might as well be the best villain there ever was. He still had nightmares about it, sometimes. The fact that Izuku was asking the question implied that he had never even considered that as an option. Like everything else to do with the man, Izuku's strength of character made Hitoshi feel very, very lucky, because if Izuku had decided to do what Hatara had done, he'd seriously doubted anyone would have found out until it was far too late. "The hardest part of this job isn't catching villains," he said. "It's trying to figure out how to stop the things that make people into villains in the first place." "Right." Izuku breathed softly, shoulders losing tension as he did. "Of course." At that, Hitoshi pushed himself to his feet and offered hand, which Izuku looked up at through his eyelashes. "I think we should both use a break after all this," he said. "Let me show you your home." Alright, I got some notes. So, first, Izuku reason to stop. What? Oh, his reason to stop. His big reason to stop, inevitably, it wasn't All Might saying, be more realistic. It wasn't Inko's constant worrying. It wasn't Bakugo constantly telling him to stop. Those were factors, but that wasn't the reason. That wasn't the push. That was not the final push, right? That was not the final shove, Because let's be honest, this was more of a shove. The final shove was Bakugo getting hurt because of his actions. And Izuku finally having that thought of, oh, I'm only hurting. Okay. And stopping because he thought him helping and him trying and him doing stuff was only going to get people hurt. And that's what stopped him. Which, you know what? Yeah, that makes sense. That really does make sense. Right? It doesn't feel like, kind of out of character-y. No, it feels like that is something Izuku would actually do. Izuku sees that his actions hurt someone else, and he stops. Because he would rather be miserable, he would rather be dead, he would rather break bones than see someone else get hurt, or be the reason someone else gets hurt, right? But he'll also feel very miserable because he's not helping people. But at the same time, he wouldn't push and try to help, because that's what made people, get hurt in the first place. And he was trying to unlearn that, and he finally unlearned that, and I'm so happy for that. He finally learned that, okay, me doing nothing is even worse, right? At least I'll be doing something. At least I'll be trying, And yeah, exactly, Izuku. I agree with you. At least you'll be trying. And I also can't believe that Izuku pulled I'm gonna go tell your mom. Like, really, Bakugo? That was so childish. I hope I said Bakugo and not Izuku. I meant to say Bakugo. I just realized I might have said Izuku. Hopefully I didn't say Izuku. I think I did. I don't know. I'm not looking back at that, and I'm not changing that. That's staying there. That's a blooper. You guys can have the time of your life making fun of me in the comments. I want to talk about Izuku being a villain, and then I'll talk about villains having a point. Izuku being a villain. Yeah, that would be scary. I've seen many fanfics where he is a villain, and Jesus Christ. Oh my god. I agree. He would be a formidable villain. He would be unstoppable because he is so smart. And you know what? You and me both, Hitoshi. If Izuku was a villain and he even pulled what that other Quirkless person did, Hatara, I think it was, yeah, they would have never found out. Not until it was too late. They wouldn't have found out till he wanted them to find out. And by the time that they found out, he would either be cruel and let them find out a little bit beforehand and lead them through a wild goose chase just for the fun of it. And then they'll realize, like halfway through, fuck, we're being led. Like literally we're being led. And then, you know, boom, the big event happens. Or they just wouldn't know until the big event happens. Be completely dumbfounded. I feel like he would go for the second one. Or I don't know which one he would go for. I know I would personally like to do the whole leading you through a goose chase, you know, and then you realize, fuck, I've been played, right? Now on to the big thing. Villains having points. And that is a point. That is a point. For the most part, people don't become villains just because. They need a reason, right? Just like how people don't, you know, necessarily become this awful person just because. They have their reason. It could be reasons that excuse their actions, or it could be reasons that are only explanations but not excuses, right? There's obviously certain, like, you know, it's gray areas, obviously. It's gray areas. For someone, it might be an excuse. For someone, it might just be a reason, right? Obviously in this point, Hatara? Yeah, Hatara. It was an excuse. No, not an excuse. It was a reason, not an excuse, to do what she did, right? It's understandable. It is understandable, right? It is understandable to the point where you could sympathize. But you have to understand that her actions were not okay. And that her explanation doesn't justify what she did. You can sympathize. You can understand why she did it. But at the same time, what she did still wasn't good, right? Again, very, very complex kind of thing. And this is all about morality, which changes per person. Someone else might say, well, it doesn't matter. I don't even sympathize with her at all, right? I, as a person, can sympathize, right? Maybe you can sympathize, but at the same time be like, I still condone her. For me, I think we sympathize. I sympathize, and her sentencing should be a little bit less, right? Just a little bit. And draw in mental health and the fact that she will die in the freaking prison, so do something else because she does not deserve a fucking death sentence for that, right? Unless she gets a death sentence, do not send her to prison. Get some, like, I don't know, house arrest or something for, like, life or something, but, like, do not send her to her death. You know she's gonna die in that goddamn jail. Which, I absolutely love that little detail that the author added there. It's a little detail that I always like to imagine when I'm role-playing with my friends. That if a quirkless person goes into jail, yeah, no, that's death. As much as our characters that we roleplay as are not quirkless, I still like to add some characters of mine that are. Because we need those... Everybody can't be so gay-friendly, LGBTQ-friendly, LGBTQ+. You know, like, they can't... Everybody can't be allies and be in the LGBT alphabet soup and, you know, not be quirkless and all that stuff. Like, there has to be, like, evil people out there. That world does not exist. Although we like to make it seem kind of exists. But I like to add those characters just to add a little variety. But on to the thing I was saying, right? All villains have a point. Like, even my villains that I have made, my OCs that I have that I do for roleplay, each one of them have a reason and it's different, right? I have a quirkless person who's doing the exact same thing. Where it's like, okay, I'm worthless. Watch me not be worthless. Look at me. If I'm so worthless and useless, how the fuck have I managed to kill 30 people? You know, like stuff like that, where it's like, it's just pure spite at that point. Or like, for example, my copycats. Each one of them have a reason, right? I could list some off. Like, Nightshade and Spider Lily basically have the same one, which is discrimination against quirks, right? They're sick and tired of this discrimination against quirks, right? Both quirkless people, not both, but all quirkless people, all mutant quirks, all villainous quirks, they're sick and tired of seeing them, mistreated because of something they can't control. Mistreated in the justice system, mistreated by heroes, mistreated by society as a whole, right? Not given basic rights just because of something that they can't control. For which, her reasoning is honestly, her reasoning is so sad. She is genuinely doing it because she wants to take control of something, right? It's kind of control, not control over the world or something like that, but she wants to take control, right? She doesn't want anything to control them, right? Doesn't want laws to control them, doesn't want anything to control them, and honestly, they're sick and tired of certain laws allowing certain horrible acts to happen. And, Spotlight reason. The Hero Commission, allowing certain, quirk trafficking things to happen to the point where, people are taken advantage of because of their quirks. Kids are being trained to be heroes and basically child soldiers, right? Take what happened at UA, right? This person, right, Spotlight really hates what happened, right? So that is a reason why they were a villain, because they hate that that's happening and they want to change it somehow, right? And that person specifically is just so sick and tired of it that they just want to prove that, hey, you are fucked up, society, and you deserve to burn, right? All these people, I wouldn't call them like gray heroes, like, oh, well, they're not gray heroes, gray villains, like, oh, they're villains, but they're really anti-villains. No. Nightshade, Spider Lily, Witch, Spotlight, they all have their reasons, right? But they all understand that society fucking sucks and we want to see them hurt just as much as all these other people are hurt, as much as we are hurt. Villakill, Nightmare, same reasoning. Eyeless, same reasoning. All of them, same reasoning. They were hurt, or they saw people around them hurt because of society and the way that society is structured, and quirkism or any other type of freaking discrimination, and are sick and tired of it to the point where they just want revenge. They don't care about society, right? To the point where Spider Lily absolutely despises society and wants to see them fucking dead. Absolutely hates it. Hates it with a passion. Wants it dead. But yeah, every villain has a reasoning, right? Doesn't mean it justifies what they do. No, but they have a reasoning. And for the most part, they, it's a good reasoning. People don't, turn to villainy for stupid shit reasons. Unless they genuinely believe that's a good reason. Or you're born evil like motherfucking All For One over there. Born evil from the womb. I swear to God, that man is the literal incarnation of evil. Anyways, enough of that. As always, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your notes. Wait, what? Take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the... Oh, before I forget, I have a YouTube channel. Well, I obviously, look at this. I have another YouTube channel where my friend Cielo started a podcast and invited me and Shadow to be co-host. So we're there and we're talking. Our first video is uploaded right now for you. It is down in the description, the link to the YouTube. So go ahead and check that out. And on there you can see me talk about fanfiction, because that's our first episode, fanfiction. Although not every episode is going to be about fanfiction, so don't get your hopes up. As always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.